Are you in a multi-site church, or you're planning, dreaming, thinking of becoming a multi-site church? Well, there are some particular nuances to communication in that environment, and this is a video that people have specifically asked me to make. So in this Word Made Digital tutorial, we're talking about multi-site church communications. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Word Made Digital Tutorials. I'm Joanna LaFleur, and this is a whole series of tutorials helping you communicate the best news in the world. So whether you're church or charity, we're focused on helping you as Christian organizations think through the implications of the digital world in terms of how that affects you, but also some professional advice on communications. And I know the world of multi-site or multi-campus communications can be complex, especially if it's something new. There's some stuff that you might not be able to anticipate until it happens. And so I would love in this tutorial to offer you some things to think about, whether you are or are planning on becoming multi-site. And maybe that multi-site even includes just simply an online service, campus, group of people who you want to connect with more. And so we want to resource you in that way. Thank you so much to the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. They are helping with these resources. They are all about being that friend you can call, email, check in with around all the things that you may not know how to do in ministry. You're focused on your mission, you're focused on your ministry, but there are some methods and details of things that you may not have expertise on. We're talking about HR policy, governance. We're talking about when laws change for charities in Canada. There's all kinds of things that are really not necessarily in your wheelhouse, and that's why becoming a member of 4Cs is an amazing opportunity. Membership is surprisingly affordable. If you aren't already a member, there are even some free resources that we want to offer you. You can go to cccc.org/free. There's a workshop there where you can check in, whether you're new at the charity and church space or you just want a refresher. What are some things that you want to do to make sure you're in compliance with the government as a charity? You don't want to be surprised. That's the worst thing. Do you ever have those dreams where you think you're going to go to jail for not doing your taxes right? Well, we don't want ever that to actually happen to anyone. And so that's the point of 4C supporting churches and charities across Canada. So thanks so much for this way they support churches and charities, but also the way that they're supporting you with communication tools like these tutorials. We have this whole archive now of tutorials brought to you by the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. We'd love for you to check a ton of them out. But in this one, we're talking about multi-site communications. All right, it wasn't so long ago that I was a church communications director, and that had evolved with the size of the church growing. So first, church communications was just a side project I took on because I cared about it, and that was my background. Then it became a validated part of my job at the church. Then it became my official full-time work at the church. Then it became a team, department of the church. And then as the church continued to grow and the value of communications continued to be evident as something that they needed to strategically invest in, then we became a multi-site church. That church now has multiple sites all over the place. But when we started, of course, we just started with the second site and then went from the second to third, the fourth, etc., and then online. And it became an increasingly complex environment. Now, when there's just one second site, that is one baby from the main one, it can be a little bit simpler, but there are still lots of problems to solve. And the more sites, locations, campuses, however you use that language at your church, the more you add, in some ways, the more complex it becomes. But also that first one, or rather the second one, but the first launch of another site can be the most complicated. So here's some advice that I've learned from my time doing it, and here's some things that I hope will help you from some other people who have been really insightful in this area of multi-site communications. Number one, language really matters as you're establishing multiple locations and sites of your church. It establishes value, importance, and really the power of what you're doing. So, for example, you want to avoid things like calling your original location the headquarters or the mothership. Maybe you don't want to call it the main site. You want to avoid things like satellite location, if that's not really truly what it is, or extension or overflow. We also want to be thinking about how that will feel if you're there, right? If it feels like you're the afterthought, the secondary thing, the not as good thing, there's the big party happening and you're not part of it. We don't want any of that. The other thing you want to think about with language, where language matters, is how you communicate titles of people, thinking through what you call consistently across the board for different kinds of leaders on your team. We want to honor and empower the leaders at all of our sites by giving them a consistent and clear name. Maybe that they're called a campus pastor or a site pastor or a parish pastor, and maybe that's titled by the city, the location that they're in. But note, when you're talking about cities and locations, when you're even thinking of what you call your locations, also language matters. If you're calling it Community Church South or the Community Church West or the Community Church Downtown, be careful that you're not doing that in reference to the original location or the largest location, because then by inference, it seems like these are just appendages to the main thing in a spider web. But rather, we want to make sure consistently across all of our locations and the pastors that serve them that we give the appropriate consistency and title and honor to each of those so that they feel like they're all equally loved and valued. You're going to find, especially in the early days of going multi-site, that there's probably going to be somebody who needs to be almost like the language police. And if you have a communications director, everyone on the leadership team should be involved in it, but especially if there's a communications lead, that's probably going to be them. Ensuring that everyone is using the same language and making sure that value is clear, that there isn't like a preferred, a favorite son or daughter. We want to make sure that all of our locations have the right titles, the right language to communicate that we are part of one church, that we are not overemphasizing the importance or value of one location, one site, or one pastor over another unnecessarily. All right, so we've established that language really matters. And now I kind of referenced in that we talked about the communications director or your executive team who's overseeing this new initiative or the growth of multi-sites. But this question then comes up. Do you need a point person, a communications lead at each site, at each campus? My tendency would say, no, you don't. Communications should be a centralized service that serves all sites, all locations, all campuses. Why? Because we want to make sure that they're consistent in their messaging and there isn't something broken telephone that happens or people are going rogue and printing graphics designs and things like that that don't match anything else going on in the rest of the church. A clear communications plan from a centralized location allows each place to be thought of with care, with a strategy for how that interplays and relates to all the other sites. Now that said, of course, everybody on your team is in the business of communications. That's your lead pastors, that's your campus pastors, that's whatever you call the people who serve and work on the local site teams, the campus teams. And so it might be appropriate at the volunteer level to have someone who's a point person for communications in terms of things like distributing print materials, overseeing photography teams, or things that might come into play physically on location at the site. But anything that can be done in a centralized way and relayed over to the campus and site teams should be done in a centralized way and not dispersed that kind of power, authority, decision making to the sites, or it gets too complicated. Okay, we've talked about language, we've talked about centralizing your communications team, and now I want to think about a strategy for capturing and storytelling at each individual site. Do we need to do that? Yes, we do. You want to think about capturing photos, stories, testimony, baptisms, amazing things going on in a kids ministry or wherever else, maybe a special barbecue or whatever might be going on at each individual site. We want to think through how can we tell the story of the whole church, but telling the story of each individual site. I think sometimes the smaller sites can get less resource in that. So maybe you want to think about something like, for example, your photography team is scheduled on rotation, both at the original campus and then also at all these other sites. That there's actually a rotation of when and where and how you take photos, capture video, film stories, whatever it may be. We want to make sure that we're capturing the story of the whole church, not just one location. And it's so easy to do if the original location has tons of resource and it might be larger in population and congregation size. And so it's easier maybe to find photographers there. But if you can schedule it out, that can be the simplest way to get photographers, storytellers, videographers, people who might write stories, write social media, show on social media what's happening across campuses live on on Sundays or on your weekend services. If you schedule that out, it's going to allow you to have thought about that. But it's a huge issue for multi-site churches to think about how you're going to strategically, thoughtfully, and schedule out telling the story of the whole church so that the whole church is represented on your social media, on emails, on video, whatever it may be, not just one original location. This next one is a question I get asked a lot. Unique versus unified channels for communication. Overall, I think it's better to have unified channels than unique channels. So for example, unified social media like Instagram, a Facebook page, maybe a TikTok account, YouTube channel, whatever it may be, those should be centralized. You also want to be thinking about a church-wide email that is centralized, sent to every site, every campus. Now, where could that not be true? Where instead of unified, might there be something unique for a specific site or campus? Well, I would say maybe you want to try something like a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group for each site. So maybe they need to have specific communication or they want to share needs and resources. Maybe there's something that makes sense to have as a communication hub online in a digital way for those unique sites and their needs. Maybe you want to do that then through a private Facebook group, private WhatsApp group, maybe Discord, whatever it is that you think is most useful for your community. But don't get away from that public, out front facing thing that is the Instagram, social media, Facebook. Don't start dividing out into sites. One of the number one reasons is simply it is a huge resource waster. Why not tell the whole story of the whole church rather than splitting it up and leaving it in the hands of probably a very busy site or campus pastor who is not skilled or trained in how to do social media necessarily. And it's one of the things on 100 other things that they have to do. If we keep that centralized, keep telling the whole story to the whole church, to the whole community, you're going to find more success there. And then find those ways like maybe a Facebook group, a WhatsApp group, or perhaps there is a secondary email you want to think about. So for example, we're going to have a church-wide email that goes out every week or whatever the rhythms are for you. And then maybe either a section in that email is unique for each site and it's targeted to the people who go to that site, or there might be a secondary email, a follow-up email on another day of the week that's specific to the people of that site. It doesn't maybe even need to be every week, maybe it's only once a month. But the point is there might be some places where email makes sense. Now that said, don't spam your people. You don't maybe know and have eyes on how many other emails they're getting from your own church community. So they might be getting the church-wide email. Maybe now you're sending them a site-specific email, but they might also be getting something from the kids and the youth and their women's retreat or who knows what else. It would be best if all of your emails can be coordinated and at least get clarity from the top. What are the emails we're sending our people? How many are we sending? And do we really want to add a site-specific email? Is that the best way to reach our people? It might just be that you want to post every once in a while in the Facebook group, or you might just want to add a quick few lines at the bottom of the church-wide email rather than sending it as an additional email. It can be really overwhelming and you might get a lot of deletes and disengagement if you send too many emails. So the last thing I want to address in this tutorial is about what if we notice that one of our sites feels like it's getting 3, 4, 5, even 10% off course. We know at the beginning that's not noticeable, but the further and further you go, that small difference, those small changes, the subtle ways that a different site might say something that's different than the official language, vision, values, purpose, mission of your organization. If a leader is starting to kind of steer things towards themselves rather than the unity of the whole, deal with it as quickly as possible. The issue will only get worse if you don't deal with it. And so if you start to see things going even slightly off course, you can address it. If you start to see language, consistency, storytelling, spamming people, information coming out too often, information not coming out often enough, maybe we're seeing print pieces go to a site and nobody knows what to do with them. If there's broken systems of communication and it's a broken telephone, whatever that may be, the sooner you can address it, the better. Because in a multi-site context, all of those issues, all of those classic things that can break down in communications, they're exponentially felt if you're in a multi-site context. So I encourage you to have courage to address issues, to address people with love and care. Lead your team. Don't be afraid to do so because, of course, we're doing this all to share the best news in the world. And so we hope this video has helped you in some small way become better communicators of the best news in the world. Thank you so much to the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities for making this and all of these tutorials possible. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. We hope you like these videos. We love you to share them with a friend, subscribe, connect with us. Let us know what you want us to make videos about, and we will do it. We would love to hear from you. Whatever you need, we're here to support you in this great work that you're doing for church and for charity in Jesus' name. And we'll see you on the next tutorial.